Hello, my name is Carrie Ann Holt. I publish as K.A. Holt. I write middle grade novels. A lot of them are novels written in free verse. I live in Austin, Texas, but right now I am hiding out in the mountains in Breckenridge, Colorado, in a little condo. And you can see behind me is a painting. That's my first attempt at doing a Bob Ross painting. So I'm trying to feel the creative vibes from the mountains while we're up here hiding out. So my newest book is called BenBee and the Teacher Griefer. And BenBee and the Teacher Griefer is the first in a series of books that's called The Kids Under the Stairs. And hopefully each of these books will be companions, so that way you don't have to read them in any order. And the idea behind BenBee and the Teacher Griefer is that there are kids and there are people in the world, and we don't always all fit into these prescribed boxes or bubbles like you have in a test. We don't all think the way that those kinds of things measure. And so BenBee is in summer school in this book. There are other kids in his summer school class. It's a very small class, and so they've all been pushed into a classroom under the stairwell. It's not even really a classroom, it's just the stairwell. And so that's why they're the kids under the stairs. And they're all there because they have failed part of their Florida rigorous academic assessment test, which they call the FART, even though it's really spelled F-R-A-A-T. So these kids have failed the reading part of the FART, and they're in summer school. And none of them want to read out loud. None of them are happy to be there. And their teacher comes in, and she's very enthusiastic, but also she gets very discouraged because it doesn't seem like she just can't do anything to break them out of their shells and to get them to read out loud and to work on retaking this test. And so the kids make a deal with her, and they say, listen, there's like this one part of our lives where we actually feel successful, where you can make a mistake, and it's not a mistake. It turns into like this really cool invention or something. And it's a video game. We're doing this. It's called Sandbox. The Sandbox is a lot like Minecraft. And they say, why don't you play this game with us, so you can see how we feel like when we feel like we're doing a good job. And so she makes a deal with them that for every 10 minutes that they read out loud in class, she will play 10 minutes of Sandbox with them at the end of class. And so as they teach her how the game works, and as she sees how video games are not just a waste of time, this interesting kind of confluence happens where the kids start reading out loud, and they discover a book that, you know, maybe they don't love reading, but they are interested in this book. So they're making their way through that while they're all playing this video game together. And, you know, she's learning more about them and they're learning more about her. And she is always telling them how divergent they are. She's like, you know, you're not dumb kids. You're not under the stairs because you're dumb. You're under the stairs because you see and think about the world in a divergent way, right? Like you don't fit into these prescribed bubbles and boxes. And that's why you're so good at Sandbox. And she's really trying to get them to believe that. Each one of the characters has their own way of communicating in the book. So BenBee is written in free verse poetry, which is poetry that doesn't rhyme. Jordan is this kind of stream of consciousness. So when we're getting a chapter that's from Jordan's point of view, it's like these paragraphs where he's just talking and talking and talking and talking, and you can kind of see his ADHD on display there. Ben Y is the only girl in the class, and she's struggling with a lot of things in her personal life. And so she is also free verse poetry. Javier doesn't like to speak out loud, so his chapters are kind of comic book-esque. They're things that he's drawn in his journal. And then interspersed in all of that, we get to see transcripts of the video game chat that everybody's having while they're in class and then while they're at home. So it's a book that's written for divergent thinkers. It's a book that's written for kids who don't always love reading and who don't have super long attention spans. So you can kind of jump in and you're like in it with a character, and then you can jump back out if you need to, and then you can jump back in when you want. It's really my sort of love letter to educators who work with kids like this, and also with kids like this who want to see themselves as main characters in stories. So in BenBee and the Teacher Griefer, BenBee, his name is Benjamin Bellows. Ben is definitely this kid who thinks outside of the box, which is a term I hate to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. He's a kid who has this ingenuity where he can walk his avatar into a video game, and he can say, okay, the thing that we need to achieve here is, to get from point A to point B. And so instead of building a boring bridge from point A to point B, what we're going to do is find some fairies and smash them on our heads so that the fairy dust sprinkles down and we can float up and we can fly over to point B, and then we can see the rest of the world laid out underneath us. Like, the way that BenBee thinks about things is not linear, right? It's all over everything all at one time. And that to me is so ingenious, the ability to see the world on so many different levels. And it can be frustrating to be that kind of thinker, when you're sitting at a desk and your teacher puts a book in front of you and says, read this, and you look down and the words are kind of swimming and the letters are moving around and you're thinking about what's happening tomorrow and you're thinking about this. But when you're in this video game that has this three-dimensional world, where your point A's and point B's are not point A's and point B's, it's just whatever you want them to be. BenBee is that kind of ingenious kid who lives for and revels in that kind of controlled chaos. So last summer, I was in between projects, and I was thinking about like what a new book would be, what would be a story I would want to tell. And in the middle of me working from home, like we're all doing now, my kids were home for the summer, and my youngest son was not doing anything but playing video games. And so I was like, I have all these books. Can you please just read a book? Just read one chapter and talk to me about it. And he just was not interested in reading. And he was always trying to get me to go upstairs and see these video games he was playing. Mom, come up here and see what I just built. Mom, come see this like crazy thing that I did. And I was like, no, stop playing video games. And so my son approached me and he said, listen, if you play, I don't know, 20 minutes of video games with me, what if I read one of your books for 20 minutes? And I was like, deal, high five, kid. And so that's how we spent our summer. I learned how to play Minecraft, and I learned how to play Skyrim, and I learned how to play Undertale. And Isaac read book after graphic novel after book, and we had the best time. And I learned so much about his gaming, and he learned hopefully something about reading and reading with his mom. And that summer became the spark for BenBee and the Teacher Griefer. I was watching my divergent thinking son solve a problem that we were having, and it was a brilliant solution, and I stole it for my book. Libraries in my life have been, at some points in my life have been just almost critical to survival, really. When I was in high school, I would leave school every day, like at the end of school, and instead of going home, I walked across the street to our public library, and I would spend hours in the library doing my homework, finding books to read. I found a genealogy section where I could look up old family stuff. And I stayed in the library because I was afraid to go home and be home alone. Even in high school, I didn't love the idea of just being in the house by myself. So I would go to the library and I would wait for my mom to finish work, and she would come and pick me up every day and then drive me home. So I got to become friends with the librarians, and they would choose books that they knew that I would like and have them waiting for me. And it was almost like a home away from home. And then later in my life, like as my oldest son was born, and I felt very isolated from the world with this tiny baby and not knowing, what was up or down, I finally started taking him to the library and finding books to read to both him and to me. And that's really what sent me on my journey to writing children's books. So libraries have been critical for me, for sure. When kids pick up BenBee and the Teacher Griefer, really when they pick up any of my books, I think maybe not even one of, I think the most important thing I am trying to impart is that anyone can be a main character. And for years and years and years, we've seen a lot of homogenous main characters in books, particularly books that are offered to children or that are part of the canon or what have you. And so there are kids who grow up. Um, and while they know there are main characters in their own lives, of course they are, whenever they find a book on the shelf, they don't see themselves in that book. Um, and you can still read and you can still, glean important things from books. But when you don't see yourself in a book, it makes it much harder to connect. And so I try really hard to write books for kids who don't even really like books, if that makes sense at all. I want to surprise people into understanding that books don't have to be like literature with a capital L, right? They can be fun and they can be written in free verse poetry, but they still impart these all caps L literature lessons, but in a way that everyone can understand and can feel and can empathize with. And so if I can write a book with a main character that's not your typical main character, not only does that do a service to the kid who needs to see himself or herself in a book or themselves in a book, what it does is it allows all the other kids who have read homogenous books to see kids who they think are other than them as the main characters as well. So that's really my goal, is that we all get a fair share with our stories that get told.